Well, welcome back. Can you imagine what kind of marriage you'd have if you spiritually bond? If you put God at the center of your marriage? If you put God's unlimited power to work in your relationship? Well, you don't have to imagine it. In my current podcast series, I'm telling you what kind of marriage you can have when you spiritually bond, and I'm telling you exactly how to spiritually bond. Dr. Clarke is a very practical person, as you know. If you're a regular listener, podcast, to the video as well as the audio, you know I'm going to tell you what to do, and it's going to be specific. Now, my brand new book, The Secret to Becoming Soulmates, is the basis of my current podcast series. And it's a gentle, gradual path to putting God at the center of your marriage. Go to my website, davideclarkephd.com, and order it if you'd like to. It's a book that you go through together. You go through my 52 devotionals together. It's not made for one spouse. It's made for both to do together at your own pace, and together you will develop a spiritual bond. That's the whole design of the book. And at the same time, you develop emotional intimacy, deeper conversations, and great sex. I'm jumping ahead of myself with the great sex. That's the next podcast. Now, before today's podcast topic, I'll answer a question from a podcast listener. This listener is watching my podcast on video now on my YouTube channel. Hopefully you are too. Why not see Dr. Clarke in addition to hearing him? Although that's up to you. Okay, here's the question. Dr. Clarke, I really appreciate your honest approach to discord in marriage. Assuming that both spouses have contributed to a marriage breakup, okay, very common, both are involved in it. What if the person who has left is the one who refuses to admit any fault, seek counsel, or believe that emotional spiritual growth is necessary? Well, very common. The spouse that has left the marriage could care less. What do? Now, I see this, of course, all the time in my practice, and the people I talk to on the phone and phone advice sessions. Here's my answer. This person, this spouse who chose to leave, sin number 1, is refusing to admit any fault, sin number 2, won't get counseling, sin number 3. These sins are adding up here, aren't they? And is unwilling to make any changes, sin number 4. Okay, this person is obviously in serious sin. Sin number 5 is this spouse blaming you for the marital problems. That's, of course, almost always part of the package. I'm blaming you for all of it. Bluntly put, it's time for tough love right now. Don't beg, don't plead, don't pursue, don't chase. Don't ask for couple counseling, kiss of death. The person's not ready for that, neither are you. Get my book, My Spouse. I've got a book for everything. Get my book, My Spouse Wants Out, and follow my plan. You get a support system in place, you get ready financially, you get the kids ready, and then lower the boom. And when I say lower the boom, I mean you tell this spouse that's left that can care less, I'm done with you. You turn the tables on them. Now, we can do a phone advice session if you want. That's all explained on my website, davideclarkephd.com, Clarke with an E. You name the marital crisis, I've got a plan for it. So that's my answer to that question. That's why I wrote the book, My Spouse Wants Out. Now, let's get to today's topic. I'm reading another, kind of working through one of my devotionals in the book, The Secret to Becoming Soulmates. And the title of this is day 2 in the book, and day 2 is Your Mom and Your View of God. That's the big idea, your mom and your view of God. Last time we did Dad. Okay, basics. Here is the personal story. My mom, speaking of myself, my mom was driving me to my first Little League baseball practice. I used to love baseball back in the day. I had played baseball with my neighborhood friends for years and was excited to be part of a real team. I was a proud member of the Dodgers. We had uniforms, the whole thing. About 200 yards from the baseball field, my excitement turned to fear. Suddenly, I was terrified of this new experience. I mean, I didn't know anyone on the team, and what if all the other guys were better than I was? I said to my mom, I've changed my mind, Mom. I hate baseball. Let's go back home. My mom replied, nonsense, David. We're almost there. You are going to be fine. You'll see. She swung the station wagon into the parking lot and shoved me out the door of the car. I think the car may have still been moving at that point. She roared off in a cloud of dust, leaving me standing there with my glove and a look of horror on my face. Of course, Mom was right. 10 minutes later, I was having the time of my life. I loved being a Dodger and had a great 2 years in Little League baseball. And as we all know, or most of us know, Sports are a great teacher of character and life lessons. Now, speaking of the Dodgers, we were a terrible team. We lost almost every game. If you have any experience with Little League, you know that all the teams are stacked. The dads that choose the teams that are in charge, they get the best players on their teams. There's 2 or 3 wonderful teams. I mean, world-class, World Series teams caliber with the great kids, and then the kids that are great at baseball, and then the rest of the runts, are on the other teams. And that's how it worked. The Dodgers, we were just a bunch of regular kids. But one shining evening, I was a pitcher. I could get the ball across the plate. Nobody else could. It wasn't big velocity, but I could throw strikes. We played the best team in the league, and there was no chance we were going to beat that team. And my parents, of course, were in the stands. They were always very supportive of me. And that night, the Dodgers beat this other team. I forget the name of the team, but they had green uniforms. And the players on that team were huge. I think most of them were 16 years old. They had full beards. They had mustaches. They're supposed to be 12, 11 years old. These were hulks, but they couldn't hit my pitching that night. It was like a miracle. We won. Anyway, that's my little Dodger story. Now, as you may have picked up, the woman who made me get out of the car, who shoved me out of the car, she's in heaven now, my mom, was a decisive, no-nonsense person. Kathleen Clarke, my mom, spoke the truth without frills and did what she thought was best for me in every situation. She was an RN, a registered nurse, and so those ladies are pretty tough, and Mom was tough. She took care of business, great in a crisis. Now, my mom's personality also shaped my view of God, and your mom's personality has shaped your view of God. Because of her, I always seen God as a decisive, no-nonsense person who wants the best for me. You see, there's a direct transfer. How you see Dad transfers and how you see Mom transfers. I believe your mom's personality has a major impact on how you come to view God. And in this day 2 devotional with your spouse, you're going to talk about that. And you can see here what I'm doing. As you talk about your mom, and each of you talk about your mom, you're not only gaining an idea of your view of God, which is the spiritual bonding piece, but also you are bonding emotionally. These are deeper conversations that most couples don't have. Talk about the weather, talk about the kids, talk about the roof needing fixed, the car problems. That's not going to get you deep. Talking about your moms and walking back through history, yeah, even a few minutes of that is a deeper conversation. Now, the Bible section of the devotional is this, Matthew 5:37. Of course, in each devotional, I have a Bible verse. And that verse says, just say yes and no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong. Okay, that's what the verse says. And man, that was my mom. It was yes or no with her. There was no in between. There were no gray areas. And frankly, that's God's too. That's God too. You read the Bible, there's no gray there. Do these things. Free country or free world. You don't have to, free will. But if you'll do these things, life will turn out well and I will bless you and you'll be closer to me. If you choose to do things your own way, the world's way, okay, you can do that, God says, but then that will cause you consequences, black and white. My mom was the same way. Now, in the breakthrough section of the devotional, which is where you develop the conversations, here, let me kind of walk you through this using my mom. This is as if I was talking to the blonde, Sandy. I'm just talking to you, of course. Number 1, under the breakthrough section, it says, describe your mom's personality, particularly what kind of person she was during your childhood and teens. You see, there's the conversation you're going to be developing. Again, I would say to Sandy, if she was here, black and white. She was a black and white person. You do the right thing, you'll be rewarded. Do the wrong thing, there'll be consequences. Just like God, frankly, that was my mom. I mean, there was no, I'm not sure what to do. She always had clear expectations. My mom was funny. She was talkative. She didn't have any filter. That was my mom. I'm frankly the same way. Why think before you talk? That's a waste of time and energy. Just say what comes into your head. We were both that way. It got us into trouble sometimes, but hey, overall, it's fun and it's spontaneous. Okay, point number 2 under breakthrough. Name one of your mother's positive personality traits and one of her negative personality traits. Okay, even a great mom like I had, there's some negative personality traits. And then briefly tell a story illustrating each of these traits. Okay, so you're both going to do this as you go through the devotional. In my case, the positive, I'd say, you know what? My mom was very, very encouraging, always positive. I could do anything. She believed in me. ever since I was a little kid. She thought I could do anything. There were no limitations. Of course, that's not true, but she was always extremely positive and encouraging, a wonderful cheerleader. When I had finished college and was looking at psychology school, I had always wanted to go. Back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, it was maybe 30 some years ago, Rosemead School of Psychology in Los Angeles, California, was the Christian psychology program for graduate studies. And that's the school I wanted to go to. So I had an interview in fact, I was in Dallas Seminary at that time. I had an interview at the Dallas airport with the main Rosemead guy. I forget his name. I wouldn't tell you anyway, because I'm going to be kind of negative. So anyway, he interviews me at the airport, and this man, a lot was riding on this interview, and it was a disaster. He didn't like me. I didn't like him. We did not click, and so the whole thing fell apart, and I was rejected. I did not get to go to Rosemead. Well, that was pretty disappointing. I went back to the dorm and talked to my best friend at that time, Tom Provenziola, and he kind of commiserated and supported me. He'd had some disappointments in his own life, but I called my mom and my dad. My mom's on the phone, and she said, this is just like my mom. Who cares about that guy's a loser. He doesn't understand you. He made a mistake. Whatever. Who needs Rosemead? God's going to provide something better, and that's exactly what God did. I ended up going to Western Conservative Baptist Seminary, which was a wonderful psychology program. I had a best friend there, Rod Cooper, just a brilliant man. We became friends, and he got me into speaking. It was a wonderful experience of scripture as well as psychology. God worked the whole thing out. Now, it was in Portland, Oregon, so it rained 9 months out of the year, but nonetheless, it was a great place. It's where God wanted me to go. So if I was going to talk about one of my mom's negative personality traits, that would probably be she did too much for me. I got to admit, I'm the baby of the family. I have an older brother, Mark, who's 2 years older. Wonderful guy, pastor, Christian school teacher. But I was the baby, and it's good to be the baby. You want to know why? Because you are spoiled. Mom did everything for me, and she seemed to be happy doing everything for me, making my meals. She used to I didn't like the crusts on my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches I had every day at school, and so she would cut the crusts off for me. I mean, really? She did my laundry. I had very few chores. She took care of everything, and she seemed to be happy doing that. Now you think that's a positive, it actually was a negative. That didn't prepare me for marriage. I married the blonde Sandy, and I expected her to do everything for me too. Because the message I learned from Mom was, hey, when a woman does everything for you, that makes them happy. Because Mom seemed happy. Okay, that doesn't work that way. We've had to work things out, the blonde and I. So that would be a negative thing about my mom. So again, you're talking this through. You're going to share a positive personality trait and a story, and a negative personality trait and a story. Thirdly, talk about how your mother's personality has shaped your view of God. Well, I've already kind of gotten into that. So I would share if I was here with Sandy. Mom was cut and dried, obey rewards, disobey consequence. We've covered that. That's how I see God, because that's how Mom was. And I think that's a good thing. Also, because of Mom, God, I always believe that God believes in me. He's for me. He's encouraging me. He wants me to do well. And now here's the negative thing with Mom. I also tend to presume upon God's grace, because Mom did everything for me, and I didn't really suffer many consequences in terms of discipline. I see God as someone who kind of will give me a break, and maybe I can get away with more things than other people. Well, that's not true. All right, God's standards are the same for Dave Clarke as anybody else. So that was a negative thing. I really had to kind of work on that. Now, the next section in the devotional is bring it to God. This is a brief prayer time. One or both of you can pray this prayer. And here's my prayer at the end of this devotional. Dear God, help me to see how my mother's personality and actions as I grew up affects my view of you. That's a brief prayer. God's going to show you that. If you had a mom that was wonderful like my mother, well, okay, you're going to have a better view of God. But if you didn't have a mother like that, if your mother rejected you, abandoned you, criticized you, abused you emotionally, neglected you, that's going to transfer to your view of God. You're going to have to work through those issues with Mom so you can see God in the right way. And you don't get to choose the family you grow up in. And to continue the prayer here, I got a little ahead of myself. Help me to avoid transferring my mother's negative personality traits to you. This is still part of the prayer. Help me see and experience you only as who you are as recorded in the Bible. Now again, all my resources on marriage, especially marriages in crisis, that's really what I do. Go to my website, davideclarkephd.com, Clarke with an E. And you'll see all the books and, of course, the phone advice service. I'm doing phone advice service. Really, 85% of my practice now is phone advice sessions with people across the country, usually one spouse in a marital crisis. That's a big part of what I do, and you can talk to me about that. I'll have a plan of action for you. So many counselors are kind of milquetoast. They're good people, but they don't have a plan for you. Listen, how do you feel about that? Well, whatever. I'm going to tell you what to do. Biblical, solid, empowering plan of action to hopefully save your marriage. Okay, here's the teaser for my next podcast, and it's a doozy. Listen to this. On my next podcast, my topic is going to be how to have great sex in marriage. Whoa, let me tell you, we're getting pretty racy in this podcast. I am one of the world's leading Christian authorities on sex in marriage. Just ask the blonde. Of course, she's the only one you could ask because she's the only one I've ever had sex with. But nonetheless, I have learned a few things about sex with Sandy, and I'll be sharing some of those in the next podcast. So I'm going to end up this podcast with what my mother always said to me at the end of every phone call or every in-person meeting we ever had I was 60 years old when she passed earlier this year. It was always, David, carry on. So I'm telling you, until next podcast, carry on.